the oboe measurement's just up 10 millimeters across the board.
It is. I would say that I think that the offset style gouge, slightly offset, helps to get the side thickness or the drop off, so to speak, from the center to a place that I like the result a lot. So
Can't wait to hear more about that offset concept.
Yeah.
With your Falstaff, what length do you tie at?
I tie it at 59. I find that if I tie it any longer, it's hard for me to get the sides to close. I think it's important for the throat to be relatively skinny, I think, as it expands from the tie, because I think that when people have pitch issues, especially with thumb octave notes on English horn, if it's not a problem with the vocal, like flatness is what I'm talking about, it may be that you're too wide just above the tie. And this actually brings up a really kind of interesting reed theory sort of philosophy question about tie length. Because when I was a student, I don't know if you guys had this experience, maybe you did, but sometimes I would ask a teacher about tie length of reed, and one of them, I think, said to me in seriousness that he didn't know what the length was. And I scratched my head at that because I thought, really? How could he not know what that is? And then I finally, the penny dropped, and I realized that what this teacher was most interested in was where and when the reed closed. So they wanted to put just enough cane on the tube so that it closed only, say, 2 or 3 winds from the top. That if they put more on the tube, then the throat might be too wide, right? And less on the tube, it wouldn't close in time. So they actually just sort of went by what it looked like and where it was closing. And to me, that was kind of a revelation, actually, because I was like, oh, duh, I get it now. This is why, and this is also why there's so much variability with tie length. But indeed, to simplify all that, with my English horn reeds, I tie at 59, and I finish, I guess, relatively long compared to colleagues. I think I finish maybe 57, 56, rarely less than 56.
And that Falstaff is slightly wide. It's a little on the wide side.
It flares somewhat from the throat. So
that's what gives you that rich, deep sound.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So I should say about reeds and English horn reeds that I think it's important to kind of think about the reed as an English horn player as being part of the vocal, right? That the vocal is an integral part of the reed. And I know you haven't asked this yet, but I'm just going to sort of jump in and talk about vocals for a second.
Oh, please.
Because I use, for pretty much my whole career, I use vocals made by John Simer. I've had a few Leray vocals I think are excellent. I had an A12 vocal is excellent, but the Simer vocals do the right thing as far as I'm concerned with the scale, and they help to hold the pitch up in the second octave. I mean, there are other things we need to do for that, right, with regard to crow, et cetera, but when I was in Hong Kong, the Boston Symphony came through, and I took exactly one lesson from my predecessor, Larry Thorstenberg, and he was the guy that explained to me how critical it is to consider the way the vocal itself tapers, so to speak, on the reed side, because the amount of taper and sort of, shall we call it maybe the speed of the taper, so to speak, greatly impacts, of course, the true length of the vocal. So if you have two vocals side by side that look like they're the same length, right, but one of them is bigger on the top, then what's going to happen is the reed isn't going to go down as far, right? So your overall length is now longer. Yeah. So honestly, I've pretty much played the same damn vocal for 20 years, the Simer vocal I happen to like. And the measurement that's critical is from the bottom of the vocal to the top of the staple. And that is, for me, is about 107, maybe 108 millimeters. So that is maybe slightly shy of what you'd call a Leray number 2.
Okay, can I ask how you measure that? Do you use like a tape measure?
Yes.
You do?
Excellent. Okay. No, it's an excellent question. I learned from the great John Simer. I asked him what to do about that. He said, well, what he suggested is I take a piece of English horn wire and string it up, inside the vocal and clip it very precisely on the bottom end and then the top end of the tube.
Oh my gosh.
And then just lay that out and measure it.
I never thought about that. It seems
Yeah.
like such a simple thing, but it never occurred to me.
He's a brilliant guy, John. He really just, really honestly, he just, he invents things, right, to solve problems. So,
another wonderful tip. Wow.
Right? It's handy. It's handy. If I have a vocal that's slightly shorter, then you see that allows me to play a reed that's a little longer, which I like. So that there's the rub, right? You have to kind of get that balance on English horn between reed length and vocal size and, all that stuff.
When I was getting my doctorate in Boston, I would listen to you play English horn every week in the symphony, and you projected and you soared over the orchestra, and it sounded effortless.
Well, thank you so much.
Pines of Rome was one of the first big solos I heard you play, and you just bellowed over the whole orchestra. It was very, very effective, and still is in my memory. I'm going to be working with some of my students on making English horn reeds for the first time. What are some common mistakes that you see students make, and what tips would you give for oboists venturing into the English horn realm for the first time?
That's a great question. We've kind of covered some of that a little bit in talking about vocal and reed shape. I think as a mistake is choosing a reed shape that's a little too wide in the throat, or rather maybe tying the reed on too short and thereby causing that effect. To give an example, another popular shape is the Giacobassi shape, which is made by Westwind, and that's Julie Giacobassi, who's the former English horn player in the San Francisco Symphony. I think that shape works particularly well because it's pretty skinny in the throat for a while. And then a common mistake is or not really a mistake, but it's one of those equations you sort of have to work out. Like if you're having pitch issues, is it the crow is too flat, or not together enough, or is it that the vocal is the issue? It's a little hard sometimes to determine where an issue might be. So sometimes I've even recommended to students who can't afford an English horn that they try to get a good vocal, though, that they can use with whatever their equipment they've been given from the school. And then there's, of course, a big question we haven't really gotten to, which is what to do about wire. And I think sometimes people maybe misinterpret what the wire is for. And I mean, it's actually a variety of things you can use it for, but I don't think you should be using wire to artificially increase the aperture. I think it's exactly as Elizabeth Masunia said. I was listening to her talk, and she had so many great tips, and she said it's really kind of more for power, so to speak, to give. I don't know quite why it does that, but you see, because and it's just as Russ DeLuna also said earlier, there's a great danger in using the wire to increase the aperture because it's going to tend to cause your sides to come apart. Right?
Exactly.
And that's a big no-no for me, and well, I think probably for all of us. That's sort of number one reed test after I clip it open. I want to make sure that when I'm putting that plaque in, it feels pretty snug. So having said all that, I don't use wire very often myself, but I think that's because I found that just for me, I feel like I get a little more resonance when I don't use wire. Resonance as opposed to kind of power, I suppose. But occasionally I do find that I need it, and so probably maybe 10 to 20% of my reeds I put some wire on. So to answer your question about getting the sound over the top of the orchestra, gosh, I don't know. I guess that's a panoply of things, I suppose. Really active air column. Just really trying to spin your air through the instrument, and maybe to some degree, just vocalizing. I think, hearkening back to that time I spent with Ray Still and listening to great singers, and if you can lead with your ear. I know this is going to sound a little esoteric and maybe kind of intangible, but if you can kind of lead with your passion for what you want to do with the sound because you are inspired by listening to a great artist, a great singer, or something like that. And then if you can, I don't know, somehow just recreate that with your air, that's super vague, isn't it?
No.
No, I think it's correct.
Right?
It's showing the priorities, right? Because our priority is the music.
Exactly.
And the reed serves that, not the other way around.
Exactly. When I got to the BSO, I was hired by Seiji Ozawa, and when I had my sort of first meetings with him, he said, I have to sort of speak in kind of Seiji Ozawa speak here just to honor him in a way. He'd say, everything's very good, but I need more. He said, I need more. Okay. So, I'm untenured and I have to sort of figure out how am I going to make more sound, right? So that's when I actually went to the Cimber vocal, because prior to that, I'd been playing a Glover vocal. And Glover vocals are excellent but really, really hard to come by. But I found that the Cimber gave me more focus in the sound. And I really kind of overdid it by the end of that first season, because Seiji, he literally finally said to me, he said, okay, that enough now. So,
just pull it back a little.
it's a badge of honor, I think, right, as an English horn player to be, to be given a hand, so to speak, right? Okay, that's too much. Really?
That never happens.
I was not intentionally trying to compete with Tom Stacey,
Was there a particular point in your career where you felt your reeds hit a new benchmark or turning point for the better?
I guess up until the time I finished my time in the Hong Kong Phil, I'd hear colleagues talking about how important the gouge was, and I knew that from Mr. Mack, because it was a big thing for him. But to be honest, I didn't really believe it. I didn't sort of get it yet. But then when I got to San Antonio and started working with the principal oboe at the time there, Mark Ackerman, the penny dropped for me, because he really helped me set up my gouging machines. And he's terrific with that stuff. And lo and behold, my reed making got a lot better. Because I paid attention to that. And also, to be honest, somehow I missed a huge lesson from all these wonderful teachers. Somehow I just didn't get the lesson about this is going to sound funny, but about how to use a radius gauge properly and how to even select cane properly. So, a simple thing like that, I was like already 30, and Mark Ackerman, showed me how to, make sure I was selecting a really truly flat piece of cane with an even curve, which I, drew through the radius gauge cup correctly, and started to chop out of the tube just using a razor blade, right? Prior to that time, I was using an arrow splitter, which I don't tend to recommend because it's not really precise enough, I think. So when I learned how to do just something as fundamental as pre-gouge properly, that was a step in the right direction, and then getting the gouging machine to work better. And so things got a lot better through Mark's help. And that really was a turning point for me. And I feel really lucky in that regard, too, because I feel like I've had two kind of, shall I call them sort of gouger guru influences in my career. And one was Mark, and the other is, my colleague, John Ferrillo, who's a whiz with that stuff, which is part of the reason I recommend his equipment, because, he's really drilled down to figure out a lot of the nuts and bolts of what makes that work.
Could you elaborate just a bit on your use of the radius gauge? Do you hold it up to a light, and if there's light shining through, that's not an even curve? Or
I do. That's right. That is exactly what I do. And I took that sort of funky picture of my reed desk, and you'll notice that I have just a basic bright reed lamp with a cool LED bulb that doesn't emit any heat. And then I did this primitive thing, and I taped some pieces of paper around, sort of to extend the shade, so to speak.
Yeah.
So then I can just